Come and fly away with me. 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 Come and fly away.
I'm a nice person, man. I never want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I will.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever it happens to be for all of you lovely people out there. My name is Nerfy, and today we're going to be discussing something that, well, I never really have discussed on this channel, and that's tech. No, don't tune out. Don't click on that video. It's juicy, unsettling, and hits close to home because it's about our DNA. Knew that would grab your attention. We're talking about 23andMe, the popular genetic testing company that's hit a serious rough patch. Data breaches, financial troubles, and a board in freefall. Yes, big questions about what is happening to your genetic DNA are happening. Grab a drink because this is going to be a ride. If you like this kind of content, give me a like, maybe subscribe, and let's start this deep dive into a saga that could rival any soap opera. And believe me, it has a lot of plot twists and a lot of drama.
There are two 23andMe services that can help you explore your DNA.
All right, I hope you grabbed your drinks. Buckle up, because the story of 23andMe is one wild ride, complete with billionaire ambitions and genetic breakthroughs. Founded in 2006 by Ann Wojcicki, 23andMe started with a bold, almost rebellious vision. Make genetic testing accessible to the masses without needing a doctor or a specialist to tell you what your genes might hold. This was about empowerment, and at first, it seemed like a noble mission.
Yeah, 23andMe, we set up 23andMe to enable individuals to get access to their own genetic information. We thought it was, it's a fascinating thing to be able to see your genetic information, and we developed a website that allows you to really explore the genetic information and see how your genetic information relates to the current research world, as well as to the ancestry, as well as to your friends and family. So one of the interesting things that we can do on the site is allow you to compare yourself to all your other friends who have been genotyped.
Imagine it's the mid-2000s. At that time, genetic testing wasn't just expensive, it was exclusive. For the average person, getting any sort of genetic insight required doctor's orders, a mountain of insurance paperwork, and often thousands of dollars. Not exactly accessible, right? But here comes 23andMe, promising that for $100 you can spit in a tube, mail it off, and in a few short weeks get a full breakdown of your ancestry and health predispositions. Maybe even a hint on which parent to thank for your cilantro aversion and which one to thank for your peanut allergy. It was like something out of science fiction, only it was real and it was here. So people went all in. Millions of people, in fact.
You can learn how genetics might influence your risk for certain diseases.
Let's talk about what made 23andMe such a groundbreaking concept. Not only was the service affordable, but it was also designed to be accessible and user-friendly. Unlike traditional medical testing, which usually gives you your results wrapped in a whole bunch of medical and scientific jargon, 23andMe laid everything out in easy-to-read reports. Want to know if you're predisposed to certain medical conditions? They got that. Or maybe you're interested in how much Neanderthal DNA you carry. They got that too. They had a report for all of it. 23andMe wasn't just telling you about your genetics, it was giving you a story, a personal, almost intimate look into who you were on a biological level. But here's where the real magic happened. Social media was booming. And in the age of selfies and curated online personas, people didn't just want to know about their heritage. They wanted to share it. And 23andMe, savvy as they were, tapped into that trend with the DNA relatives feature, a tool that allows users to connect with distant relatives who shared portions of their DNA. Imagine logging in and finding a cousin you never knew existed, or discovering that you shared DNA with somebody halfway across the globe. Suddenly, genetic testing wasn't just a scientific endeavor, it was a social experience. Genealogy became social currency. People were sharing their results at family gatherings, posting about it online, and using it as a springboard for conversations about identity and heritage. By 2018, 23andMe had exploded in popularity. The company was valued at a whopping $1.75 billion. And its database had grown to over 5 million customers. Not only was this database huge, it was valuable. The sheer scale of genetic data at their disposal caught the eye of pharmaceutical companies, most notably GlaxoSmithKline, GSK, a pharmaceutical behemoth that saw massive potential in genetic data. GSK poured $3 million into 23andMe, securing access into anonymized genetic data that they could use to identify patterns, understand health risk, and ultimately develop new drugs. It was a partnership that promised to turn genetic testing into a revenue-generating machine for both parties involved.
23andMe led to personal information from millions of people going up for sale on the dark.
Let's talk about trust, because that's what 23andMe really struck gold. Customers weren't just handing over their spit, they were handing over their DNA, the very blueprint of who we are. And why would they do this? Well, it came down to a mixture of novelty, curiosity, and yes, a lot of trust. For most people, genetic was a mysterious and intimidating field. 23andMe managed to break down those barriers, offering people a fun, approachable way to explore your DNA. And for a long time, that trust held strong. But as I've said in other videos, there's a thing about trust. It's fragile. When people feel secure, they don't worry too much about what could go wrong. They're swept up in the excitement of discovery, and they assume that the company they're dealing with has everything under control. And for years, 23andMe delivered on that promise. Their marketing was all about empowerment, self-discovery, and yes, a bit of scientific magic. The idea of something going wrong seemed almost unthinkable, just like the idea of the Titanic sinking was unimaginable. Fast forward to today, and that trust has started to crumble. The optimism that once surrounded genetic testing is now tinged with doubt. People are starting to ask hard questions about privacy, data security, and what exactly they signed up for when they sent in their saliva sample. And as we'll see in the next segment, a massive data breach in 2023 shattered that trust, leaving customers questioning just how safe their data and DNA really is.
23andMe led to personal information from millions of people going up for sale on the dark web.
Now, we'll get into the real meat of this soap opera. The part where things go from fun science fiction to a horror story. October 2023, a month that will live in infamy for 23andMe and its users. This is when 23andMe suffered a data breach that exposed the personal genetic data of nearly 7 million users. That's right, this wasn't a minor hack. This was a full-blown security disaster that rocked the company and rattled the confidence of everyone who trusted them.
Following the data breach, which the company confirmed in an online statement.
If you're wondering how this breach went down, let's talk about credential stuffing. It sounds harmless enough, but it is actually a very sneaky technique hackers use when they get a hold of username and passwords from one breach and try to use the same credentials on other sites. You'd be absolutely shocked at how many people just reuse passwords across multiple accounts. In fact, reusing passwords is so common that hackers barely have to work for access. They just grab a list of stolen usernames and passwords and start plugging them into different websites until something just clicks.
Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your Chief Security Fanatic here, and in 23andMe news, we gotta talk about them because 23andMe are blaming their victims for their latest data breach. Now here's the thing, they're partially right. I think this is an important one to understand. Now, a good backdrop on this is TechCrunch's Lorenzo Franceschi Bicciari, and Lorenzo, I apologize just in advance for butchering your last name, which is really cool, but Lorenzo had a really good write-up here in TechCrunch because essentially 23andMe is facing more than 30 lawsuits from their victims due to this data breach, and so 23andMe is now deflecting to basically blame the victims in an attempt to absolve itself from any responsibility, according to a letter basically sent to a group of victims as seen by TechCrunch. Quote, rather than acknowledge its role in this data security disaster, 23andMe has apparently decided to leave its customers out to dry while downplaying the seriousness of these events.
For 23andMe, that something was their DNA relatives feature. This feature is a way for users to connect with relatives and distant family members who also have the 23andMe service. The hackers went right for it. And once they were in, they weren't just stealing names and birth dates. They were accessing genetic profiles, information that quite literally tracks you back to your very roots.
If it's DNA information, it's going to be real bad.
If you thought that was bad, it gets worse. The hackers didn't just grab data and run, they got strategic. They started sorting the stolen data by ethnicity, creating lists of users who were Ashkenazi Jewish, Chinese, and other specific ethnic groups. Then they sold these lists on dark web forums, where anyone with enough cryptocurrency could buy access to people's genetic profiles, filtered by race and ethnicity. Let's pause for a moment and take that in. This wasn't just a breach of privacy, it was a breach of identity on a level we have never seen before.
Meanwhile, a hacker is listing millions of pieces of stolen data from the family genetic site 23andMe for sale online. That information belonging mostly to people of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. 23andMe acknowledged the leak, but insists the company itself wasn't hit. They say the hacker took usernames and passwords from other hacked websites and tried them on 23andMe. The hacked data includes regional locations and pictures. Customers are urged to change their passwords and to use two-factor authentication.
Imagine finding out your ethnicity, your heritage is being marketed as a commodity on some sketchy corner of the web, and it raises some terrifying questions. Why would someone want to buy data that's sorted by ethnicity? In a world where discrimination, hate crimes, and yes, bias are still very real issues, the idea that people could be targeted based on their genetic background is a dystopian nightmare come true. And it's exactly what privacy advocates have been warning about for years.
Web say it contains at least 1 million data points relating to Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry.
Now, 23andMe has tried to assure customers that even if their data was used in research, it's anonymized. Anonymization is a process of stripping out personal, identifiable information, making it so that, in theory, no one can link data back to you. But here is the uncomfortable truth. In the world of genetics, anonymization is more myth than reality. Research has shown that with enough data, supposed anonymous genetic profiles can often be re-identified. It's a bit like blurring out someone's face. You can't see who they are right away, but if you have enough context, it's not that hard to figure out. Okay, here's how it works. When researchers cross-reference anonymized genetic data with other sources of information, like public genealogy databases or even social media profiles, they can start piecing together a puzzle. So if someone really wants to trace that anonymous data back to a specific person, they probably could. In the wrong hands, anonymized genetic data can be used to identify individuals, revealing details about them that they might not even know themselves.
It's founders mode, basically, this whole saga playing out in public with all the scrutiny that goes along with this.
So we've covered the data breach and its horrifying implications, but that's only a part of this story. The other side of this drama is that 23andMe isn't just grappling with security failures. It's dealing with financial troubles that's making its future look very shaky. Let's rewind a bit and look at how a company valued at nearly $2 billion just a few years ago is now floundering, with its board members resigning in masses and customers jumping ship.
Hey, Kelly, all the drama around 23andMe, that could give startup founders one more reason to stay private or at least reconsider the consequences of founders mode, a narrative that has been sweeping through tech in recent weeks, especially when you have to answer to a public board and shareholders. Now, the CEO and founder of the DNA testing company, Ann Wojcicki, she brought the company public via SPAC just 3 years ago. It has since lost 99.9% of its value from its $6 billion market cap peak.
In early 2004, 23andMe faced a corporate shakeup that would have sounded unbelievable just a few years earlier. Every single independent board member resigned. And we're talking all of them. Why? Because the CEO, Ann, had a plan to take the company private. But it wasn't exactly well received. The board members didn't just quietly step down. They left with a parting message that they had lost confidence in the company's direction. It's not every day you see an entire board resigning at once, but in 23andMe's case, it looked like the writing was on the wall. Now, if you're thinking, why should I care about 23andMe's financial situation? Let's break it down a little bit. When a company like this faces financial instability, it is a huge deal for customers. Here's why. If 23andMe goes under, they're going to have to sell off assets to pay off their debts. And guess what? Your DNA might be one of those assets. Imagine a scenario where, because of financial troubles, 23andMe ends up selling your genetic data to the highest bidder. It could be another company, a research organization, or even a marketing firm. Once that data is sold, who knows where it might end up. But there's another layer to this. Yeah, another one. Financial trouble also tends to mean cost-cutting measures, and that can have direct impact on things like customer service and data security. Think about it. When a company is focused on staying afloat, customer support and security upgrades are usually the first to go. So, while 23andMe might have a stellar track record for security and customer service in the past, there's no guarantee that they're going to maintain those standards when they're struggling financially. And with the amount of sensitive data they hold, this is the last place where you want corners to be cut.
By the way, their stock is getting crushed. It is now just about 80 cents the last I checked.
Not surprisingly, the public didn't take this news well. After the breach and the boardroom drama, people were understandably spooked. On social media, the sentiment shifted quickly. Formerly loyal customers began advising each other to delete their accounts and pull their data from 23andMe's database. Privacy advocates, who had been wary of consumer genetic testing from the start, jumped in to offer guidance on how to withdraw consent for data sharing and delete profiles. The response was swift and vocal. People were no longer comfortable handing over their DNA to a company facing such serious issues. If 23andMe had managed to retain customer trust through the breach, the financial instability and the boardroom shakeup crushed any remaining goodwill. People aren't just worried about this one-time breach. They're concerned about what else might go wrong as the company tries to claw its way out of financial trouble. And if the response on social media is any indication, customers aren't sticking around to find out.
23andMe is now facing a class action lawsuit.
All right, so let's pull all of this together because honestly, the more we dig, the more we see how truly murky the legal landscape around genetic data actually is. We're talking about some of the most personal information a person has, their DNA. You'd think we'd have laws in place that clearly protect it, but in reality, we don't. In fact, the regulations around genetic data are so loose that they barely offer any enforceable protections to consumers. So let's explore what that means, why your medical genetic testing is protected, and why it's so important for companies like 23andMe to take responsibility even if the law isn't forcing them to.
In the U.S., this concern has been addressed by a group of federal laws known as HIPAA.
Now, I know some of you are asking, well, what about HIPAA? Doesn't that protect our genetic data? Well, let's talk about that for a second. HIPAA, the Health Insurance Probability and Accountability Act, was passed way back in 1996 to keep your medical information safe and sound. Think of it as a security guard for your personal health info. Medical records, prescriptions, bills, all the things that make what HIPAA calls Protected Health Information, or PHI. HIPAA's rules are crystal clear. Hospitals, insurance companies, and doctors are bound by law to keep your PHI locked up tight. They are not allowed to hand out your medical information willy-nilly. And if they do, they are hit with some serious, hefty fines and penalties. HIPAA was crafted with a very specific crowd in mind, quote-unquote covered entities, like healthcare providers, insurers, and anyone who's involved in your direct medical care. But here's the catch. HIPAA only applies if you're dealing with healthcare providers or an associated entity, meaning your clinic, your pharmacy, or your insurance company. It doesn't apply to companies that work outside this circle. Enter 23andMe and other direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies. They aren't medical providers. They are private companies offering a service that's closer to ancestry entertainment than hardcore healthcare. So HIPAA, with all the privacy requirements and red tape, does not touch them. This means that 23andMe can handle your genetic data however it wants, within the boundaries of its own privacy policy, which we've already seen how that worked out, because it's not qualified as PHI under HIPAA.
HIPAA defines protected health information, PHI, Has any data about a person's health?
Because they aren't bound by HIPAA, companies like 23andMe can set their own privacy policies and terms of service with pretty much zero oversight. They don't need to follow HIPAA's strict security requirements or worry about penalties if they decide to share your data for research and profit. HIPAA's safeguards simply don't apply here, which leaves your genetic data in what privacy advocates call a gray zone.
So are they selling our data?
Yes, period. So this week it was announced that one of the companies sold their data for $300 million to a pharmaceutical company to develop drugs. Well, first of all,
This is 23andMe.
This is 23andMe. People opted in and said, yes, you could use it for research. You know, using it for research, I'm all excited if Harvard University is going to study and learn about a disease. But a pharmaceutical company, it's a very different story.
Because your DNA isn't covered by HIPAA, there's basically zero federal protection over who can handle it and how. Think about it. Your genetic code doesn't just reveal your ancestry or health risks. It could spill some family tea too. And it's not just scientists who are interested. Insurers, employers, even marketers might be all over it. For something that reveals so much about you, you'd think that it'd be under lock and key. But nope. Thanks to the lack of HIPAA protection, it's practically an open book. When you use 23andMe, you're pretty much at their mercy. They set the rules, and they can switch them up whenever they want. Sure, some states have tried to set up their own laws, but privacy advocates are practically shouting from the rooftops that we need strong, specific genetic privacy laws at a federal level. They argue that genetic data is so unique and personal, it deserves protection like medical records under HIPAA. Until that happens, though, it's up to companies like 23andMe to play nice. And let's be real, history has shown that's not going to happen. In short, HIPAA's limitations mean that if you want to protect your genetic privacy, you'll have to be savvy about reading the fine print. Or just accept that your DNA might not be as private as you think. Now that you have this info, let's keep going.
So GINA, the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act, said employers with more than 15 employees, so not small ones but large ones, cannot discriminate based on genetics.
So why isn't there a federal law to protect this kind of sensitive data? Well, there have been many attempts, but none that made it that far. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic brought genetic data to the forefront of the national conversation, with many companies collecting DNA samples for vaccine research. At that time, there was a push for a federal genetic privacy bill, but it didn't gain much traction. Lawmakers argued that existing consumer privacy laws, like the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, GINA, were enough. But here's the problem with that reasoning. GINA was designed to protect people from genetic discrimination in health insurance and employment, not to govern how private companies can use genetic data. Essentially, it's a narrow law that doesn't address the broader issue of consumer data privacy. What's really needed is a comprehensive federal law that recognizes genetic data as a unique category of information. This would mean regulating it at the same level of care as medical data under HIPAA. A federal law could establish clear rules on how companies can collect, store, and share genetic data. And it could include enforceable penalties for companies that fail to protect consumer information. But until that happens, consumers are left in a precarious position, relying on companies' self-imposed guidelines and patchy state laws to protect their most personal information.
And the privacy agreement. This is them. I mean, can you imagine? Has there anybody in history that's ever read all this stuff?
This brings us along to another big issue. Terms of service agreements. Most people don't read them, and companies know this. But in the case of genetic testing, agreeing to a company's terms of service means agreeing to give them unprecedented access to your genetic information. Sure, they say it's anonymized, but as we've already discussed, anonymization has its limits. These terms of service agreements often include language that allows companies like 23andMe to share data with third parties, use it for research, or even sell it in certain cases. Technically, this is all disclosed, so customers are consenting to it. But here's the catch. Is it really consent if most users don't understand the implications? Most people signing up for a genetic test are thinking about ancestry reports and health insights, not data partnerships with pharmaceutical companies. So while companies claim that they have their users' permission, the reality is that many people don't fully grasp what they're agreeing to.
But when you sign up, the first thing you do is you sign or you click the terms of service and the privacy agreement.
Let's talk more about anonymization because this is a term we hear a lot from companies that deal with sensitive data. When companies like 23andMe say they anonymize data, they mean they remove any obvious identifiers like names and addresses. The idea is that if the data can't be directly tied to an individual, it's safe to share with researchers, pharmaceutical companies, or anybody else interested in genetic data. But here's the problem. Genetic data itself is an identifier. Your DNA is as unique as your fingerprint, and with enough cross-referencing, even anonymized data can be traced back to you. Let's say a pharmaceutical company buys a data set from 23andMe. They don't have names, but they have genetic information. Now, if that same person has uploaded their DNA into a public genealogy site like GED Match or MyHeritage, it's theoretically possible to match that anonymized data with the publicly available genetic profile and identify that individual. This isn't just a theoretical risk. Researchers have demonstrated how easy it can be to re-identify people from supposed anonymized genetic data. A 2013 study published in the journal Science found that researchers could re-identify individuals in public DNA databases with just a few genetic markers. The risk is real, and it's one of the reasons privacy advocates argue that anonymization isn't enough to protect consumers.
So the suit also accuses 23andMe of failing to protect customers with Chinese and Jewish heritage who were apparently specifically targeted in this.
One of the biggest concerns with 23andMe is their research partnership with GlaxoSmithKline, as well as potential future partnerships with other companies. On the surface, this partnership seems win-win. GSK gets access to a massive amount of genetic data to help develop new drugs, and 23andMe gets funding and credibility as a major player in genetic research. But here's where it gets ethically murky. When customers submit their DNA for genetic testing, they're thinking about ancestry, health insights, and maybe connecting with some long-lost relatives. They're not necessarily thinking about becoming a part of a pharmaceutical company's research database. Even if customers technically agree to the data sharing in the terms of service, it's debatable whether they're giving informed consent if they don't fully understand what that data could be used for.
You know, fundamentally what 23andMe believes is that it's really about choice. And if you want to get access to something that is fundamentally yours, we believe it's your right to get access to it. It's not for everyone. That's abundantly clear to us, and those people should not have to do it. And so, you know, 23andMe really wants to encourage the debate. We want to encourage the debate. We want to be a participant in it. We want to be supportive of it. And I think we remain very firm in that we believe individuals should have the right to get access to this information, and how it's going to be used, and what are the good things and what are the bad things.
There's also the issue of profit. When GSK uses 23andMe's data to develop a new drug, the revenue from that drug goes to GSK, not to the individuals whose DNA helped make it possible. This raises questions about fairness and transparency. Should customers be compensated if their DNA data directly contributes to a profitable medical breakthrough? And should companies like 23andMe be more upfront about how their data might be used? These are tough questions that don't have easy answers, but they're at the heart of the ethical concerns surrounding direct-to-consumer genetic testing.
A number of matches, his third and fourth cousins. At first, police didn't release a lot of these details.
Another major area of concern is the potential for law enforcement to use genetic data. This issue burst into the spotlight in 2018 with the caption of the Golden State Killer, who was identified through a public genealogy database. Since then, law enforcement agencies have shown increasing interest in using genetic data to solve crimes. Currently, 23andMe has a policy of refusing to share data with law enforcement without a court order. But policies can change, and as more people add their genetic information to the database, the temptation for law enforcement agencies to access these resources will only grow.
There was a lot of speculation about how they did find their man. But when I started calling up genealogists, they could guess right away. This is exactly how they have been finding biological parents for adoptees and sperm donor conceived kids for years. Since then, the dam has broken. DNA is being used to solve cold cases and even active investigations. In the last 5 months alone, this technique has contributed to 15 arrests.
The use of genetic data by law enforcement raises a whole host of ethical and legal questions. On one hand, it can be incredibly effective to solve crimes, especially cold cases where traditionally evidence has just run dry. On the other hand, it blurs the line between public and private information. If law enforcement starts using consumer genetic data to solve crimes, it could open a door to a kind of genetic surveillance where everybody's DNA is just fair game. Privacy advocates argue that using genetic data in this way violates the privacy of the innocent people who happen to share genetic markers with a suspect. There's also a concern that genetic data can be misused or misinterpreted. For instance, a person might share enough genetic markers with the suspect to be flagged as a match, even if they are completely innocent. And without strong legal protections in place, there's a risk that consumer genetic testing could turn into a surveillance tool. A risk that becomes even more concerning when you consider the lack of federal regulation.
And creating, I think about other industries where it's been a big...
So where do we go from here? If there's one thing this 23andMe saga has made clear, it's that current laws around genetic data are not sufficient to protect consumers. What's needed is comprehensive federal litigation that addresses the unique nature of genetic information. Such a law would recognize that genetic data isn't like a credit card number or an email address. It's a fundamental part of who we are, and it deserves its own set of protections. In the end, the 23andMe story is a cautionary tale about the risks and rewards of sharing genetic information. While genetic testing offers fascinating insights and holds the potential for groundbreaking medical research, it's clear that our laws have not caught up to the technology. Until we have a robust legal protection in place, consumers need to be aware of the risks and take steps to protect their privacy. Because in this current landscape, the consequences of a breach go beyond the ordinary and into the deeply personal territory. Alright guys, if you didn't realize that genetic testing has so much drama, welcome to the world of tech. We've journeyed through 23andMe's rise to fame, the boardroom meltdowns, its breach horror show, and the murky ethical waters in between. And let's be real, getting your ancestry results might be fun, but when it comes to giving companies your DNA, it's a whole different ballgame. Because, as we've learned, genetic data isn't just a cute family history update. It's serious, deeply personal, and if mishandled, can become, well, everyone's business. Now, remember, 23andMe isn't the only player in this genetic game, and they won't be the last to shake our trust. With privacy risks, legal loopholes, and enough high-stakes boardroom drama to fuel a TV series, we're seeing just the beginning of what's bound to be a long conversation about who we trust with the most basic building blocks of who we are. So, if you're already in the system or thinking about joining, remember that a $99 ancestry test could come with a whole lot more baggage than you bargained for. Thank you all for sticking with me for my first journey into tech and our deep dive into genetic data and the surprising scandal of spit in a tube. If you like today's video, hit the subscribe button, drop me a like, and let me know what other tech or rabbit holes you want me to explore. Until next time, don't forget to change your passwords and maybe keep your DNA to yourself. If you take meds, don't forget to take your meds. If you do not take meds, go outside, touch some grass, drink some water, and as always, have the day that you deserve. Bye!